You stopped checking your phone every 5 minutes. You didn't decide to stop. It just happened. One day you realized you hadn't looked at a chart in 3 hours and you didn't feel anxious about it. That should feel like progress, but it doesn't. It feels like you care less. Like the fire went out. You're wondering if that's the same as giving up. Most people think losing interest means they're done. They think passion is supposed to stay loud. But what actually happens is different. The noise drops away first. The part of you that needed constant stimulation stops getting fed and it goes quiet. What's left doesn't feel like much. It feels like you're going through motions. The trades you take now feel smaller than they used to, even when the position size is the same. You used to feel something when you click the button. Now you just click it. You don't talk about trading the way you used to. Someone asks what you're working on, and you say something vague. You used to have opinions about everything. Which indicator works? Which time frame is best? Now when someone asks you, just say it depends. You're not trying to be mysterious. You genuinely don't care about the debate anymore. That used to be the fun part. Now it's just tiresome. You wonder if that means you've become lazy, or if you've lost your edge. The thing you don't realize yet is that you've stopped needing to be right about things that don't matter. You used to defend your approach because your approach was tied to your identity. If someone said your method was wrong, it felt personal. Now when someone criticizes something you do, you just nod. You don't argue. You're not even that interested in whether they're right. You know what works for you and what doesn't, and that's enough. But it doesn't feel like confidence. It feels like apathy. You used to finish every session with a review. You'd go through every trade and write notes and think about what you learned. Now you close the platform and walk away. Sometimes you don't even remember what you traded. That scares you. You think maybe you're not taking it seriously anymore. You think maybe you've slipped back into carelessness. But the truth is, you're not reviewing because there's nothing new to review. You did what you always do. It either worked or it didn't. There's no lesson in repetition. Your journal entries got shorter. They used to be paragraphs. Now they're one line. Took the setup. It worked. Took the setup. It didn't. You look back at old entries and they're full of feelings and theories and questions. Now there's nothing. Just facts. You worry that means you're not thinking anymore. But thinking was never the problem. Overthinking was. You've stopped solving problems that don't exist. You don't feel excited when you're right. That's the part that bothers you most. You used to get a rush. You'd feel smart. Validated. Now you close a winning trade and you feel nothing. You check the balance. It's higher. You nod. Then you move on. You think maybe you're depressed. Maybe something's wrong with you. But you're not sad. You're just not reacting. The wins don't mean what they used to because you've seen enough of them. They're not special anymore. They're just data. The losses don't wreck you either. That should feel like growth, but it doesn't. It feels like numbness. You used to spiral. One bad trade would ruin your week. Now you lose, and you barely blink. You think maybe you're in denial. Maybe you're avoiding the pain. But you're not avoiding anything. You just stopped interpreting losses as failure. They're friction. They're part of the cost. You didn't decide to feel this way. It just happened after you stopped trying to avoid it. You're not watching other traders anymore. You used to follow people. Check their updates. Compare yourself. Now you don't. You're not trying to be disciplined about it. You just stopped caring what they're doing. It's not relevant to you. You have your own thing. It works or it doesn't, but watching someone else won't change that. You used to think community was important. Now you realize you were just looking for permission. You don't need that anymore. You stopped looking for new strategies. That one's hard to admit. You used to read everything. Every book. Every thread. You were always looking for the missing piece. Now when you see a new idea, you skim it and move on. You're not closed-minded. You're just full. You have enough information. More won't help. You finally hit the point where the bottleneck isn't knowledge. It's execution. And you can't learn execution from reading. You don't fantasize about quitting your job anymore. You used to imagine the moment you'd walk in and tell them you're done. You played it out in your head 100 times. Now you don't think about it. You're still working. Still trading. Nothing dramatic has changed, but the urgency is gone. You're not racing towards some finish line. You're just doing the work. That feels like you've lost your ambition, like you've settled. But ambition was always about escape. You're not trying to escape anymore. You're just building. You used to talk about risk-reward ratios like they mattered. You'd calculate them before every trade. You'd post about them. You'd judge other people's trades based on them. Now you don't even think about it. You know what your risk is. You know what you're aiming for. The ratio is implied. You don't need to say it out loud. You're not trying to impress anyone. You're not trying to prove you know what you're doing. You just do it. Your screen is simpler now. You removed most of the indicators. You used to have 5 or 6 things running. Volume profiles, moving averages, RSI. Now it's almost empty. Just price. Maybe 1 or 2 reference lines. You didn't remove them because someone told you to. You removed them because you stopped looking at them. They were just noise. You were using them to feel like you were doing something. Now you realize doing less is harder than doing more. You don't have a watch list anymore. You used to track 30 tickers. You'd scan them every morning, build a list, rank them. Now you look at the same 3 or 4 things. Sometimes just one. People would call that lazy. They'd say you're missing opportunities, but you're not missing anything. You're ignoring distractions. You used to think more options meant more edge. Now you know more options just mean more decisions. And decisions drain you. You stopped setting big goals. You used to have a number in your head, a monthly target, an annual target. You'd reverse engineer it. Break it down. Track it. Now you don't. You just trade. The account grows or it doesn't. You're not indifferent. You care about the result, but you stopped tying your worth to it. The goal was always arbitrary anyway. It was just something to chase. Now you've realized the chase was the distraction. You don't prepare the way you used to. You used to spend an hour before the session, reviewing, planning, getting in the zone. Now you sit down and start. No ritual, no warm-up. You just go. That feels reckless, like you're winging it. But you're not. You've done this enough times that preparation is built in. You don't need to hype yourself up. You don't need to remind yourself of the rules. You just know them. You stopped believing in motivation. You used to watch videos, read quotes, pump yourself up. Now you don't. You're not motivated. You're just consistent. Motivation was always a substitute for structure. You needed it when you didn't have a system. Now you have a system. It runs whether you feel like it or not. That's supposed to be freedom. But it feels like you're on autopilot. Like you're just going through the motions. You used to think you'd feel different when you got good. You thought confidence would feel strong, certain, powerful, but it doesn't. It feels quiet. It feels like nothing. You don't announce your trades anymore. You don't explain your thesis. You just take the trade. You don't need to justify it. You don't need anyone to agree. That should feel like strength, but it feels like isolation, like you've drifted away from something. You don't celebrate wins anymore. You used to post them, screenshot them, tell people. Now you don't. Not because you're humble, just because it doesn't feel worth mentioning. It's just another trade. You did what you were supposed to do. It worked. That's it. You think maybe you've lost your joy. Maybe you've become mechanical. But joy was always tied to novelty. Once something stops being new, it stops being exciting. That doesn't mean it's not working. You stopped asking why. You used to need reasons. Why did this work? Why did that fail? You dig into every move. Look for causes. Now you don't. You just observe. It moved. You were in or you weren't. The why doesn't change the outcome. You used to think understanding was control. Now you realize understanding is just comfort. It makes you feel smart, but it doesn't make you profitable. Your trades look boring now. You used to take setups that felt clever, counterintuitive, bold. Now you take the obvious ones, the ones everyone can see. You're not trying to outsmart the market. You're just following the pattern. That feels too simple, like you're not doing enough. But simple is repeatable. Clever is random. You finally stopped confusing complexity with skill. You don't track as many metrics anymore. You used to log everything. Win rate, average win, average loss, expectancy, Sharpe ratio. Now you just look at the balance. It's up or it's down. That's the only number that matters. The rest was just decoration. You were tracking them because you thought that's what serious traders do. But serious traders don't need to prove they're serious. You stopped trying to predict. You used to have a forecast for everything. Where the market's going. What's going to happen next. You'd build a narrative. Now you don't. You just respond. The market moves. You react. You don't need to know where it's going. You just need to know what you'll do when it gets there. Prediction was always about control. You've stopped trying to control things you can't. You don't feel smart anymore. You used to feel like you had an edge, like you saw things other people didn't. Now you just feel like you're doing a job, a repetitive job, the same thing over and over. That feels like regression, like you've gone backwards. But you haven't. You've just stopped performing. You used to trade like you were proving something. Now you trade like you're building something. Those feel different. You don't have strong opinions anymore. Someone asks you about the market and you shrug. You say you don't know. You're not being coy. You genuinely don't know. And you don't need to know. You used to think having opinions made you sound informed. Now you realize having too many opinions just makes you rigid. The market doesn't care what you think. It does what it does. You're just along for the ride. You stopped looking for confirmation. You used to check what other people were saying. Read the news. Look at sentiment. Make sure you weren't alone. Now you don't. You take the trade based on what you see. If other people agree, that's fine. If they don't, that's fine too. You're not trying to be contrarian. You're not trying to fit in. You're just doing what your system says. That feels lonely. But lonely is different from wrong. You don't post your trades anymore. You used to share everything. Now you don't. Not because you're secretive. Just because there's nothing to say. You took a trade. It's open. You'll see what happens. There's no story there. No insight. No lesson. It's just a trade. You used to think sharing was part of the process. Now you realize sharing was part of the performance. You don't need an audience anymore. You stopped reading trading books. You have a stack of them, half read, bookmarked. You used to think you'd get back to them. Now you know you won't. There's nothing in them you need. You're not smarter than the authors. You just don't need more information. You need more repetition. And books don't give you that. Experience does. You don't feel like you're improving anymore. That's the scariest part. You used to feel progress. Every week you'd learn something, get better at something. Now it just feels flat, like you've plateaued, like this is as good as it gets. You think maybe you've hit your ceiling, maybe this is it. But plateaus aren't failures, they're consolidation. You're not stuck, you're stabilizing. The growth already happened, you just didn't notice it because it was quiet. You stopped trying to optimize, you used to tweak everything. Entry timing, exit timing, position size, stop placement. Always looking for a better version. Now you just run the same process. You're not being lazy, you're being consistent. Optimization was always a disguise for doubt. You were changing things because you didn't trust them. Now you trust the system, so you leave it alone. You don't feel like a trader. That's what you can't explain to anyone. You don't feel like you've arrived. You don't feel transformed. You just feel like someone who does this thing. It's not your identity. It's just your work. You thought becoming a trader would feel like becoming something, but it doesn't. It just feels like you have a different routine now. You stopped caring about being right. You used to argue with the market. You'd hold positions because you believed in them. Now you just follow the price. If it goes against you, you get out. You don't care if it turns around later. You don't care if you were right eventually. Right doesn't matter. Only profitable matters. That used to feel like weakness, like you were giving up too easily. Now it just feels practical. You don't check results during the day anymore. You used to refresh constantly. Watch the P&L tick. Now you set it and forget it. You'll check at the end, not because you're disciplined. Just because checking doesn't change anything, it just makes you react. And reacting is expensive. You finally internalize that your job isn't to manage the trade. It's to manage yourself. You stopped thinking in trades. You used to focus on each individual outcome. This one worked. That one didn't. Now you think in clusters. A week, a month, a quarter. The individual trades blur together. That should feel careless, but it doesn't. It feels accurate, because that's how Edge works. It doesn't show up in one trade. It shows up across 100. You were zoomed in too close. Now you've zoomed out. And from this distance, everything looks different. You don't feel excitement anymore, but you also don't feel dread. You used to swing between the two. The highs were high. The lows were low. Now it's flat. You're just steady. That feels wrong. Like something's missing. Like you've lost the passion. But passion was never sustainable. Passion burns out. What you have now is something quieter. It doesn't have a name. It's not passion. It's not discipline. It's just commitment that doesn't require emotion. You stopped needing to understand yourself. You used to analyze your psychology. Why did I take that trade? Why did I hesitate? What does that say about me? Now you don't. You just notice the pattern and adjust. You're not trying to fix yourself. You're just trying to build a process that works even when you're not perfect. That feels shallow, like you're avoiding the deep work. But the deep work was always a distraction. You don't need to heal. You just need to build systems that account for your flaws. You stopped waiting for the breakthrough. You used to think one day it would all click. Everything would make sense. You'd feel different. Now you realize it already clicked. You just didn't notice because it didn't feel how you thought it would. The breakthrough wasn't a moment. It was a slow erosion of the things that didn't matter. What's left is small, quiet, boring, but it's real. You don't look forward to trading anymore. You used to. It was the best part of your day. Now it's just a part of your day. You do it. You move on. That feels like a loss, like you've sacrificed something important. But what you've actually sacrificed is the need for it to be special. It doesn't need to be your whole identity. It doesn't need to validate you. It just needs to work. You stopped believing in secrets. You used to think the best traders knew something you didn't. Some hidden edge, some trick. Now you realize they just do the basics longer than everyone else. They don't have special information. They have patience. And patience looks boring. It looks like nothing's happening. That's why most people quit before they get there. They think boring means broken. You don't defend your losses anymore. You used to explain them. Bad luck. Weird price action. Unfair move. Now you just accept them. They happened. They're gone. There's nothing to defend. A loss is just information. It tells you the trade didn't work. That's it. You used to take it personally. Now you just take it. You stopped comparing yourself to where you thought you'd be. You used to have a timeline. By this age, I'll be full-time. By this year, I'll be making this much. Now you don't. You're just here, doing this. However long it takes, the timeline was always arbitrary. It was based on other people's paths, but their path isn't yours. You're not late. You're not behind. You're just on your own schedule. You don't need proof anymore. You used to need evidence that this was working. A big win. A perfect week. Some sign that you were on the right track. Now you don't need proof. You just keep going. The proof is in the continuity. You're still here. You haven't quit. That's the only evidence that matters. Everything else is noise. You stopped looking for the next level. You used to think there was always something more. Some advanced technique, some higher plane. Now you realize there's just this, the same process. Over and over. Forever. That sounds grim, but it's not. It's just reality. Mastery isn't reaching a destination. It's staying in motion without needing the motion to feel new. You don't feel successful, but you also don't feel like a failure. You're just in the middle, doing the work, seeing results sometimes, not seeing them other times, continuing anyway. That's not supposed to be the story. The story is supposed to have a turning point, a climax, a resolution. But real life doesn't have those. Real life is just a long stretch of ordinary days where you either keep going or you don't. You stopped needing it to feel good. That's the final thing. You used to need trading to make you feel something. Alive, smart, successful, in control. Now you don't need it to feel like anything. It's just something you do. Some days it works. Some days it doesn't. You show up either way. Not because you're disciplined, not because you're tough, just because this is what you do now. And stopping would mean starting over. And starting over sounds exhausting. You're not inspired. You're not motivated. You're not confident in the way you thought confident would feel. You're just here, still doing it, still building. The doubt you feel isn't a sign you're failing. It's a sign you've stopped needing the highs. And the person who needs the highs never makes it. Because the highs don't last. What lasts is the ability to continue when nothing feels like it's happening. You have that now. You just don't recognize it yet.